Giselle Joffer and Frank O'Brien, and our consultant, Judy Barrett, who will be with us consulting and assisting the board throughout the proceeding. I've got some preliminary comments that I'd like to make to everybody, and then we'll proceed with a presentation tonight from the applicant. First thing I want to acknowledge is that we had a site visit planned for January 16th that was postponed due to rain. I would like to, we're going to have a second site visit, which will be the first site visit this Saturday at 10 o'clock at the site. I will ask any member of the audience or any other interested party who wishes to to be at the site visit to contact Beverly Sutton at bsutton@townofmilton.org for the purpose of getting on a list. The reason why we have a list is we need to limit the attendance at the site visit to 20 persons to be compliant with the Commonwealth's order with respect to COVID-19. Ms. Sutton will then fill the 20 spots, and to the extent we have more than 20 people, and I believe that we'll schedule a second site hearing, site visit. Question for the board or for the applicant is whether or not the following Saturday, January 30th, would be acceptable.
Mr. Chairman, the 30th is acceptable for me.
Yeah.
It's also
I don't know
fine.
that, Giselle,
Yes, it's fine for me. Thanks.
I don't know that everybody needs to attend, but that's great. You know, Judy, does that work for you?
Yes.
And Jesse?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that day works.
Now, Mr. Hill, I don't see Mr. Hill. Is he on? I know he represents the Vos Hill Neighborhood Association.
I don't see him yet, Jeff.
Okay,
I think he's
So
on,
we'll
his
take-
hand is raised.
we'll tentatively put as the second site visit, January 30th at 10 o'clock.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
Attorney Hill has his hand raised.
Oh, he does.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Ernie Hill has his hand raised. Okay.
All set, Jeff.
Okay. Attorney Hill? You're muted.
There he is.
Good evening. Good evening, Mr. Chairman. I just want to let you know that I was here and January 30th is fine with us.
Okay. 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 So we'll plan on January 30th at 10 o'clock for the overflow crowd from the initial 20. And then we'll proceed with as many site visits as necessary so that everybody who wants to see the site can see it. Tonight's hearing is for the purpose of having the applicant introduce the application, and I'm going to explain that in a minute. Let me I want to share my screen here for people to get familiar with how we're organizing these documents. This is the Town of Milton's website, and I just want to point to people where we have put. So down on so this is the town's website, and then if you go to the Board of Appeals section of the website, and you have then you go over here to the left to go to 40B. And on the 40B page, there's a separate folder for 582 Blue Hill Avenue. And if you open that folder, you'll see that there are several different subfolders where, for example, we've placed people's comments. And you can go through those files and you can see all of the documents that we have. There's also another page on the website with the full application that was made to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So I wanted to just make sure that people understood that we're using the website as a central library. So if you send in a note, a letter in support or in opposition or general comments on the application, we're going to use the website so that everybody has them. I'm going to advise the applicant that we received comments from the town and from the Historical Commission, which we've put on the website as well. And I urge you to check that on a regular basis. Tim has been putting documents on there pretty regularly. Let me also call to your attention this document. I'll do that again. It's in the public hearing information folder. So if you click on that and then open up this PDF file, there's a simple document that lays out the schedule and a bit of the procedure that we intend to follow. I will keep this updated during the, I actually can't read that, so I'm going to call up another version of it so that I can actually read it. I want to refer to it, but it's a little bit of a roadmap for people so that they can follow the procedure. So we've got on here obviously the name of the members, the applicant, the peer review firm, firms that have been retained. We'll advise everybody. I'm going to go through the procedural rules of the hearing right now. Relatively informal, but still an important proceeding. We want people to be aware. All hearings will be recorded. All documents will be assembled on the website. All hearings will generally start at 7 o'clock and run not later than 10, time permitting. We're not going to close the evidence at 10 in the middle of a sentence, nor will we run to 10 if the subject matter of that particular hearing has been satisfied. But generally, people should plan on these being 3 hours. The procedure we'll follow is a presentation from either the applicant, the neighbors, from the town, depending upon the night. And then we'll entertain a limited number of questions. Now, these questions are not a substitute for a presentation or rebuttal to the applicant. They are regular questions raised in the course of the particular subject of the presentation. All questions must be directed to the board. I will then redirect them to the applicant. I'll also note that Judy Barrett, our consultant, may ask questions on the board's behalf of anybody presenting. And of course, the members of the board are entitled to ask questions at any time. Statements should be brief, perhaps not more than 3 to 5 minutes, to the point and not repetitive, and in the interest of time. We will strive for efficiency pertaining to how best to enter the evidence through timely testimony, presentations made as a team where possible under applicable COVID-19 guidelines. We recognize, the town recognizes, the applicant recognizes the challenges of making this presentation via Zoom in the COVID-19 environment. So to those of you who are participating, and I hope all of you will, please be patient with the technology. And any lawyer making an appearance must indicate so in writing and identifying their clients. The hearing will proceed generally as follows. We'll have a scheduling and logistics meeting, which we've had. We'll have the site visit, which we postponed, but which we've scheduled now for Saturday. We're going to invite an introductory statement from town officials. I'm going to invite that tonight so that people will understand how the town is organizing its response to the application and putting in its own statements. We're going to introduce the applicant, and the applicant will be invited to make a presentation, which will begin tonight, led by Mr. Schumer. We'll have testimony and questions from the town. We'll have testimony and questions from members of the general public. We'll have a presentation of the peer reviews that are undergoing. We'll have rebuttal from the applicant or the close of the hearing. Written testimony can follow, and then we'll have the board decision. The following section of this is a little bit of a schedule to keep track so that people can keep track. Now, we've got 14 hearing dates that have been set aside by the town, consistent with the technology that's been made available to us. I don't know that we're going to need all of these hearing dates, but we do have them reserved, and they've all been calendared and scheduled. Tonight, so as we proceed, we're going to try to let people know what to expect within reason. Tonight, we'll have a project overview by the applicant with brief presentations by the applicant's full team. Tomorrow, the applicant will make a full presentation on project architecture and landscape architecture. And Thursday, the applicant will make a presentation on civil engineering. We'll have a second site visit on Saturday, and then the following week, we'll have hearings we'll have hearing on Tuesday, and then we'll have more hearings the following week, the first week of February. After the engineering presentation, the applicant will be invited to make a presentation on traffic and safety, on project finances, and the board has asked the applicant to discuss the specifically requested waivers from the town's bylaws that are in the application. Following that, we'll have a detailed or a presentation from the town, the peer review presentation, citizen comments and questions, rebuttal from the applicant and follow-up, and then close of the hearing. That's the general procedure. It will be subject to modification as time permits to accommodate all of the testimony. And we're hopeful that we'll close the hearing and issue a decision well within the statutory time period that's been set by the Commonwealth. Let me stop sharing my screen and go back to the hearing. That document will be available on the website and will be regularly updated. So if people want to know where we are in the hearing, you can refer to the schedule and procedure, and then you'll know, so that if you're interested in traffic, for example, you can tune in that particular night. As I said, tonight we're going to be hearing from Jesse Schomer on a general presentation of the application and an introduction of his full team. Let me ask the members of the board if there are any questions with all of that, or if everybody's all set. Any questions of the applicant?
No questions, Mr. Chairman. I congratulate you on your organizational abilities.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No questions from me either.
Okay. All right. Mr. Hill?
Nothing here.
Okay. Let's see. Okay. Let me before I ask Mr. Schomer to begin his presentation, I want to introduce Tim Zerwinski. Is that right, Tim?
That's right.
Tim Zerwinski, the town planner of the town of Milton, to give us a few remarks and to give us some expectation of what we can expect with respect to the town. Tim is the town's planner and has been asked by the Board of Selectmen to organize comments from town officials. He has graciously provided the board with a number of those comments, which have been put on our website, as I just showed you. And you'll be hearing from Tim later in the hearing as to the specific comments by the town. But I want to just give him an opportunity to introduce himself and give us a little idea of what to expect. Tim?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the board. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So as the chair mentioned, my name is Tim Zerwinski. I am the Director of Planning and Community Development for the town of Milton. And I have been tasked by the select board to essentially, be the town's presence in these hearings. Behind the scenes, I've been asked to organize and coordinate with all of the relevant town department heads, DPW, police, fire, public health, others, to analyze this application and the other 40B applications, and provide an initial set of comments, which we've submitted today. Again, as the chair mentioned, are available on the website. These are initial set of comments based on our analysis of the written application. We're looking forward to the presentation of the project today and in the next few renditions of this hearing. My role here is to, again, monitor these hearings, bring any relevant information that maybe was not clear in the applications or is maybe new or has changed since the applications were submitted, and bring those back to the relevant staff so that they can either make a change in their judgments or just take in that information. We're also going to be looking forward to the results of the peer review analyses that have been commissioned. I think that is when we intend to, take a look at those and review them in the context of the entire project, and really get a feel for what the physical impacts of these projects, or this particular project is going to be on the town's infrastructure, and on the neighborhood. I think that's that's something where again, we have a good idea of what the project is, but it is important to take in the presentations and to see the analysis from the peer reviewers, so that we can start to again, get a really good idea of what this project needs to do in order to properly mitigate the impacts that it may have on this part of town. One thing I wanted to kind of just go over really quick, if you'll indulge me, because I think there's been some questions among some folks in town about the town's presence in these hearings, what the town's role is. This is a permitting process, and I've been tasked with again representing the town and being a part of these hearings and monitoring these hearings, as a permitting exercise. We have retained a legal advisor as a town to give us advice on how to, on the procedures and kind of the progress of these hearings. If it comes to that, we have legal advice and legal guidance. But I think we are still, this is a permitting exercise, and I have a great deal of experience in development review. My previous stop in my career was at the Boston Redevelopment Authority. My job was to manage the review of all types of development projects, from 14-unit 3-decker conversion in Fields Corner to a 32-story tower that involved the preservation of the historic Huntington Theater, to the 11 million square foot redevelopment of the Suffolk Downs racetrack. I'm not saying that to sound like a big shot by any stretch of the imagination, but what I am saying is that I have a good deal of experience in development review and the permitting of large development projects, and really helping not just town officials and the community, but also approval granting boards, helping them understand the physical impacts of the project and how those impacts get mitigated. And so that's my job here. I've been doing it for quite some time. I'm happy to take that on for the town, and be the town's presence here. So again, thanks a lot for the chance to introduce myself, and I'll be here. You may not hear from me, but I'll be watching.
Thank you very much, Tim. Appreciate that. Okay, Mr. Schomer, we welcome to the Board of Appeals. We look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Attorney Jesse Schomer of the Law Offices of Rignante Stereo, with our offices are out of Wakefield. Mr. Chair, before I begin, I noticed that a number of our team members are their attendees. I was wondering if we could make them panelists so that they'll be able to share their screen and give their presentations once I'm finished with my remarks.
Jesse, can we have their names?
Yes, Beverly.
Is Natalie one?
Natalie
Howard?
Adams. Natalie Adams is one.
Natalie Howard?
Adams.
Adams, okay. And
Thank
she's here.
She's our landscape architect.
Yep, just bear with me. I'm gonna. Oh, here she is. Okay. Thank you for this. Okay.
The next one is Dan Dumays from MDM. And if the other members of the team can hear me, if you just want to raise
Raise
your
their
hand.
hands. Yeah, that would be a big help.
Yeah.
DJ, Dan. Oh, no, Dan Dumays.
Dan Dumays, yep.
Okay, here we go. Let's put him up there. Dan Riggs.
Dan Riggs.
Perfect.
And D'Artagnan Brown.
Yeah, I'm just looking for. Okay. Dan Riggs, we gave, no, not yet. Okay. Dan. You said Dan Brown, Jesse?
Yeah, D'Artagnan Brown.
Hmm.
So
Okay, let's see.
there's also, there's a name
Would he
that,
be now, would he be Mansfield Elks, by the way?
that would be Jim Burke.
So that's
He's with us.
perfect.
And it looks like Dan Dumays is not in yet.
No, everyone with their hands up is in.
I still see Dan.
No, we got it.
You got it?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you for accommodating us on that. We appreciate
Well, thank you for the list.
it. Everybody's here now.
Perfect.
So again, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. My name is Attorney Jesse Schomer. I believe Attorney Ted Regnante was trying to join this call, and maybe he'll be on in a few minutes. Ted and I are representing the applicant in this matter, 582 Blue Hill Ave LLC, managers Jacob, Joseph, and Stephen Tamposi. And the Tamposis are also the owners of Comprehensive Land Holdings LLC, which is a related entity that owns the property of this development located at 582 Blue Hill Avenue. To introduce the team, architecture for this project was done by Embark Architecture and Design. Here tonight, D'Artagnan Brown and Dan Riggs. Landscape architecture was done by Verdant Landscape Architecture, tonight represented by Natalie Adams, registered landscape architect. Project civil engineering was done by DeSalle Burke Sala, and tonight Jim Burke is representing that office. Traffic and safety consultancy was done by MDM Transportation, and they're represented tonight by Dan Dumays and Robert Michaud. And our 40B fiscal consultant is Bob Engler of SEB LLC. He's not here tonight, but if he is needed for future hearings, the board may see him. So if I may, just to introduce the project in a very general sense, I'd like to give, as it were, a 30,000-foot view of the project and then ask the team members on their particular project areas to drill down a little bit more detail. But on the hearing, the evenings to come, we'll get down into the ground level detail. So tonight, I think, is just going to be a general overview. And I would anticipate that we'll be less than an hour. And then that'll be some opportunity for the board members and members of the public to ask questions and offer their opinions. So the property that we're looking to develop, as I said, is 582 Blue Hill Avenue. It's located directly on Blue Hill Ave in the Bose Hill neighborhood of Milton. The site is accessible to public transport via the MBTA bus line 716, which runs down Blue Hill Avenue, as well as the Fairmount MBTA commuter rail station. And both of those are within walking or biking distance to the site. The site also has access to Interstate 93 via Route 138 to the south. Amenities in this project area include Adelphi Academy next door, Curry College right down the road, as well as Milton High School, all of which located within 1 mile of the site. Slightly farther away would be the Milton Town Hall and town offices, Milton Academy, Pierce Middle School, and the nearest branch of the Milton Public Library, all of which are a short drive away. Now, the site itself that we're looking to develop has an area of approximately 4 acres, just under 4 acres. It's currently developed with a large single-family mansion house with a detached carriage house and various other structures, including a walled-in garden complex. As the board members may already know, the mansion house on the site was built in the 1920s, and my understanding is that that was recently added to the MACRIS database by the local historical commission. And so for that, we will be seeking a waiver of the town's demolition delay bylaw. The property at 582 Blue Hill Ave is not located in any FEMA flood zones. There are no wetland resources on the site, and there are no protected animal species, vernal pools, or anything of that nature. There is a intermittent stream that was located just off the site. However, no work is being proposed within 100 feet of that stream, and so no wetlands disturbance is anticipated with this development. Currently, all public utilities, including electrical, natural gas, sewer, and water, are available to the site via existing connections. Now, this project was initially proposed early in 2020, when it was filed with the Massachusetts Housing Finance Agency, also known as Mass Housing. And on June 11th of last year, Mass Housing issued what's called a project eligibility letter, also sometimes known as a PEL, which made a number of determinations about this project that's currently proposed to the board members and shown on the plans before you. The determinations that Mass Housing made in the PEL are in material part 6. The first of which is that this project appears to be financially feasible. Second, that the applicant has control of the site, which in this instance just means that they own it outright. The third finding that Mass Housing made was that the applicant qualifies as what's known as a limited dividend organization, which means that it's required by 40B regulations to limit the profits that it can get from this project. The fourth finding that Mass Housing made is that this project meets all Chapter 40B affordability requirements. And there are a number of ways that projects can do that. But in this case, that requirement is satisfied because 25% of the proposed apartments will be dedicated as perpetual affordable units restricted to residents earning at or below 80% of the area median income. The fifth finding that Mass Housing made is that this property, and specifically the site, is generally appropriate for residential development. And sixth and finally, and I think most importantly, Mass Housing made the finding that the proposed project is generally appropriate for the site, taking into consideration factors such as the proposed use, the proposed building massing, the density of this project, the topography of the site, environmental resources, and most importantly, the integration of this project into the existing neighborhood and the development patterns in the area. So the project itself, as shown on the plans that we'll get into a little bit more detail in a few minutes, it's proposed to be one building containing 118 residential apartment units. Those units will consist of 48 one-bedroom apartments, 58 two-bedroom apartment units, and 12 three-bedroom apartment units. And I would just note in regard to the three-bedroom units that is a requirement of the state that we provide at least 10% of the units as three-bedroom units. And the way that Chapter 40B regulations work is those units have to be scattered around the building and distributed proportionately in terms of the unit types and sizes. So they can't be stuck into one part of the building, and they'll be indistinguishable from the exterior from any of the market rate units. The proposed building that we're planning varies from 3 to 4 residential stories over a parking level. And the project will contain a total of 176 parking spaces. Based on 118 units, that's a ratio of approximately 1.5%, which is typical for multifamily apartment housing in the greater Boston area. The parking story will contain 161 parking spaces, so the majority of the parking for the project is hidden underground, and there are an additional 15 surface spaces proposed at the front of the site. The proposed building has been designed by Embark Architecture to reference the existing single-family mansion house that is proposed to be raised as part of this project, as well as to reference other homes in the neighborhood. And they'll go through some of those references in their presentation tonight and again tomorrow. The building mass we're proposing to break that up visually by the use of the building elements such as a mansard roof line and variations in color and materials, as well as horizontal and vertical articulations and step downs in the roof line. So in terms of project impacts, one of the main issues that typically comes up in Chapter 40B projects is traffic and safety. And so that's one of the things that Mass Housing asked the applicant to take a look at after they issued the project eligibility letter. And so the applicant has hired MDM Transportation to take a look, as I mentioned, and they issued a report back in June, which concluded that the area roadways have ample capacity to accommodate traffic from this development, and that the project traffic will be, quote, inconsequential with no material delays or material impact to operating conditions. And I know when there's 118 units that are proposed, conclusions like that may seem somewhat counterintuitive to people who deal with traffic on a day-to-day basis. So we'll be looking forward to MDM Traffic to go through their findings in detail tonight and at future hearings to explain why exactly it is that they reach those conclusions. In terms of the safety of the site from a vehicular standpoint, MDM's report found that all of the intersections and roadways in the area are below state averages for crash rates, and that the project design meets all applicable safety requirements, including sightlines. So in other words, the conclusion of MDM will be that the project will have no material impact on public safety or traffic. Just one final note before I turn things over to D'Artagnan from Embark Architecture. I would note that I understand that the planning board submitted a letter earlier today with some comments, some of which are reiterated from the mass housing process, some of which are new. We're in the process of reviewing that, and we'll plan on responding to those comments in greater detail as the project moves forward. So with that, Mr. Chair and board members, unless the board has any questions for me, I'll turn things over to D'Artagnan.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesse. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, D'Artagnan Brown from Embark. Judy, it's good to see you again. We look forward to giving a brief overview. We understand clearly that we'll be getting into the architecture tomorrow. Jesse has done a great job at kind of positioning this building overall in the greater context. And so from here, I'll take it through and certainly happy to answer any questions at the end. As Jesse mentioned, the site, if you can see in this outline here, is a little over 4 acres. It's just over 173,000 square feet coming off of Blue Hill Ave with Delphi Academy to the page north here, and then a residential context as we move through. One thing to note, and we'll get into a couple aerial site plans, is there is quite a drop off in grade, something we factored in as we've looked at the positioning of the structure, the proposed structure on the lot itself now. As you do come off Blue Hill, right now you go through kind of a gated pillar to the existing structure that we are proposing to raise on the property. And then as you move down through the property, you can see some of the grade drop in slope. As we move further back around, and you can kind of see designations of where this is taken from, this is further down to what we're calling the rear yard of the property, looking back up. And one thing you'll note in our conceptual pass at massing out the strategy of positioning the building is working with this grade to really tuck in all of the parking, as Jesse alluded to, with very minimal number of spaces up on the surface. And so speaking of that, coming off of Blue Hill, we're entering at what we call a topographic grade of 130 foot in terms of elevation. And as we move down to the site, you can see in bold letters here, we drop by the time we get to the front of the existing structure down to 122 feet. So that's an 8-foot drop. As we get to the rear of the existing structure, we're about 110 feet, so about a 20-foot drop. And then as we get to the rear portion of the parcel, we're at a 100-foot drop. So from Blue Hill Ave to the back of the site, we're about a 30-foot drop in grade elevation. And something, just worth noting, and what we'll be showing tomorrow to further elaborate it is kind of a working model of how this building fits into the site. I know we did get some comments back today, which we appreciate, and we'll be able to address in a working dialogue tomorrow. Just by way of typology context in and around Milton, this is really to kind of speak to the larger scale multifamily development throughout the neighborhood. And I'm sure you all are very familiar with these, but just quickly moving through 50 Elliott Street, Milton Landing, the Winter Valley Residence, and as we move down through the Hendry's 36 Central, Fuller Village of Brush Hill. And a lot of these are speaking to some of the typographies and the architecture that will get through in more detail tomorrow. But at this point, we just wanted to pay note to the typology context. From there, what we've done is also, understand some of the immediate context that we see in and around the neighborhood and architectural elements that we think will really help kind of mitigate between the proposed project and as we kind of feather into the existing context. And a lot of it is to do with architectural elements such as the mansard roof, kind of the gabling and the structuring of the volumes, which is, which we're demonstrating through some of this architectural context, which we'll talk to about in more detail as well. And then just some of the range of multifamily, again, playing with different scales, being able to take some of these mansard elements, dormer elements, creating kind of underpasses, moments of relief. These are all, key drivers that will help us set up the architecture as we move through this process. From a contextual level, in terms of the site planning approach, coming off of Blue Hill Ave, what we're showing right now is an initial massing where we've already looked at how do we break up the scale to work not only contextually with the grading of the site, but also from a massing perspective as we start to detail through these elements. So, and we'll zoom into this, but this is essentially where we have the 15 surface spots behind kind of an existing tree line along Blue Hill Ave. You can see figuratively here, we have an H-shaped building in terms of layout, and we'll get into a couple initial site sections, but the building actually steps to work with the grading of the site as we move to the residential houses on Meeting House Lane. But essentially the main volume kind of parallel to Blue Hill Ave is where we have 4 floors of residential. Those both step down to 3-story sections of residential that kind of wrap around a courtyard. Below this courtyard, and I'll show you in a minute, is where we're really tucking in the parking, again, working with the contextual drop in grading. A couple working sections, and again, we'll get into more detail tomorrow, but just showing how we've nestled the parking of the building into the grade. It's really the four stories of residential that then step down to the 3 as we work through the contextual grade change in that 30-foot elevation drop. And then just a diagrammatic section of noting how we've, the plan is to tuck the garage in, work off the existing grade. That turns into a front and rear courtyard, and then we drop down and move across the site. So again, as Justin mentioned, the majority of parking will be shielded from site, which we think is an important feature when we're looking to position this building into the residential context. So as we have here again with the parking, so entry into the garage parking here, and you can see what we're going to call the podium or the courtyard level of the residential structure houses the 159 spaces with direct elevator access. In addition to that, we have all of the handicap parking that would fall relative to the count of the building that has access through the elevator lobby into the residential building above. As we move up through the building, the notion here is to use the central portion of the building, which projects out from the main volume that runs left and right page here. That would house the building lobby amenity and be the direct connection out to the courtyard. Natalie, our landscape architect, will get into more details on that. But in terms of how we've laid out the site here now, again, the main volume of the building kind of parallels Blue Hill Ave. And then to left and right here, we have what we're calling wings that extend out in fashion to maybe a larger scale sort of residential structure that pivots from the larger main mass of the building and then steps back as we move up in height. The mix of the units, again, as Jesse mentioned, 118 units. And through that, we have a combination of one bedrooms, so those average 820 square feet, and they make up about 41% of the mix. Our two bedrooms that average 1,075 feet make up about 49%. And then at the 10%, we have the three bedrooms around 1,310 square feet average. One thing to note too, just relevant to the kind of new world we're living in now in terms of this whole post-COVID and how we look at life. After the fact, we will be designing these units that are kind of respectful to the new way of working. So a lot of these units, a two-bed, 1,050 square feet, we'll be able to set up to a really nice two-bedroom unit that allows a work-from-home scenario. In addition to amenity space that may have ability for residents of the building to work, fruitfully within kind of the setup program within the building itself. So just being cognizant that, there is a change in pattern in how we see life even in the next, 1 to 10 years. And we want to be able to be smart about that as we design through the parameters of the building. As we move up, again, that the mix of the units kind of carry up through the building. And then lastly, as I mentioned on the fourth floor, pulling back and keeping the density really along Blue Hill Ave, being cognizant of the residential context as we move to site rear. And then this is lastly kind of the roof plan of the building denoting, and then some working elevations, which we'll have more detail on for tomorrow, but just talking through the architectural setup, which we'll definitely speak to more tomorrow. And I think with that, some of the sample units, again, just as I mentioned, we'll look through a myriad of different layouts, but again, from the 1 to 2s and the 3s. And our kind of first pass at an architectural rendering. So again, here, this is the view looking back into the entry of the residential building right here, kind of in central courtyard. And one thing you'll note, even though we understand early in the process, and we look forward to working with everyone on this as we move through it, and we've done in I think successfully in other towns, is really hearing the input from both this board and the peer reviewers, and being able to address that as we move forward. Just a couple of key things to note here. So, in the contextual massing of the building, you'll see even at this very initial stage, we are very cognizant of how this building reads both along Blue Hill Ave itself and as we move through the building. And I think one thing we'll start to demonstrate is how we've worked the massing and the strategies on the components used to break down the massing across the site. So I think with that, I'd like to introduce Natalie from Verdant, our landscape architect. And Natalie, I'm happy to flick through the pages and, please feel free to shout out when I should switch to the next.
Thank you, D'Artagnan. My name is Natalie Adams. I'm with Verdant. We're a landscape architecture firm working on this project. I'm going to go through a general overview. You've note that the change of orientation here. We see Blue Hill Ave running at page right. And so that just to orient everybody, you'll see the drive that circumnavigates the building. And on the lower part of the page, yes, thank you, there's the drive entrance for the parking underneath the building. And just to take a walk around the site, starting at Blue Hill Avenue on the top of the page to the right, down along the front, we have these existing trees. Some of them are in really good shape and we'd like to save those. You'll note the existing trees have a nice circular quality with a little dot in the middle. Those are all the trees we're trying to save. So you'll see those all around the site. And then any new plant material tends to, you look at it and it tends to look a little bit smaller on the planting plan. But when it reaches full maturity for the trees in 10 to 15 years, they'll be quite large. So to walk around that, we have a site wall that runs along Blue Hill Avenue, and there's some existing wall, and we've also added to it to denote the entry, and there's some nice site walls that run along the front of the building as well. The parking along the front, where the front entry is, as at grade, very accessible. And then you'll also see the landscape. It's called landscape on structure. So those are where we'll have some planting on structure, and there's some patio for the patios for the people. Also in, let's see, so going around the drive, we're really trying to buffer the neighbors. So you'll see these evergreen trees here and there, and sometimes we space them at the property line. Sometimes we've placed them more towards the building. So you get series of buffers for the structure as well as the existing plant material. Can we go to the next page, or is there something else you would like me to cover, D'Artagnan?
No, that's perfect.
Okay. Real general. We'll drill down on it tomorrow night. This page, when you're looking at this page, this is the probable plant list for the site. So the plant list is listed on the left part of the page, and you'll see some nice imagery of some of the proposed plant material. It also talks about a native meadow mix that we're going to use on some of the hills. And so you can look through our plant. This is probable plant material, but look through it and see and drill down on that. And the next page, just for a general overview, this is our amenity deck. And so at the amenity deck, you see 4 stories above, and you come out to the amenity deck, and we have a nice series of living room spaces. We also have dining areas, barbecue grills, and then there's the bocce court, which we took off. There's an existing bocce court on the site right now, so we wanted to kind of bring it up and embrace that. And that's our general overview for tonight, and we'll get in more depth tomorrow night with Blair Hines, who's the principal with Verdant. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, a quick question, if I may.
So, Brian.
I just want to make sure that we're getting our terminology correct here. The landscape architect just said amenity deck. I want to make sure that that is the courtyard in the rear that Mr. Brown was talking about.
That's correct.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Welcome.
Thank you, Natalie. So I think with that, we'll jump into civil engineering. Do we have Jim?
Yep, Jim Burke here. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, excellent. My name is Jim Burke. I am a civil engineer with the DeSalle Burke Sala. We're land surveyors and civil engineers for this particular site. What we did is we provided a land survey originally for a 4-acre parcel located at 582 Blue Hill Ave. Located the driveways and significant trees and buildings, of course, for the property. Then we also located, there's a wetland located to the north that's actually on Delphi Academy land. The 100-foot buffer for that wetland it extends onto the property to the south, to the northeast corner. Utilities provided on the building are, we have public water. The sewer runs to the south and connects to the sewer main and Meeting House Lane. You have overhead power and communications from Blue Hill Ave that ultimately run underground to both the existing building, existing single-family home, and the carriage house located to the north of that. In addition to the detail that we provided on that, we did some test pits throughout the site. We found the soils to be a loamy sand to a sandy gravel. The USDA maps the area as a Canton soil, which is a hydraulic B soil, which is good for recharge. I think we found actually better soil than what was mapped. So we kind of designed using a low-grade A soil for the stormwater that I'll get into later on. If you want to go to the next slide, D'Artagnan.
Yep.
And that looks like kind of the layout of the building. We're looking at the building's 58,000 square feet that it basically encompasses the garage portion of the building. And on top of that is a 37,800 square foot residential building that shoots off from that platform deck above the garage. If we can hit the next slide. Next one. So in the grading plan, we worked hard, as D'Artagnan discussed earlier, to fit this building into the slope. It slopes from elevation 130 at Blue Hill Ave down to 82 in the northeast corner of the property. And I think it's like around 112 or so in the southeast corner. But you know, all the grading that we're proposing for this particular site is held pretty tight to above that green shaded area. There's a 3-to-1 slope that extends down that supports the driveway in that particular location. We do have a retaining wall that runs along the northerly property line that varies, in, for the majority, I'd say it's about 4 feet high to allow the gradient of the driveway to be an easy slope for cars to maneuver on. And gets down to be maybe the high point of 8 feet down at the low corner, what we discussed earlier. The next slide. Next one. So utilities, we're obviously going to disconnect the existing utilities that are servicing the property today. And we're looking to basically connect the new building the same way. You're going to have water and fire protection coming from Blue Hill Avenue. There are 2 mains on that street. Right now, we're connected to the smaller main that's closer to the property on the east side. The town, I think, has a preference to connect to the west side, which is fine. We will need to get a mass highway access permit for that, and we're prepared to take care of that as well. As far as stormwater goes, we're looking to meet obviously the state requirements for the stormwater management standards for water quality and recharge and the like. In the front, we have a collection system that conveys stormwater to that light blue square, which consists of 60 Cultec chambers and a 5x12 configuration that actually contains the entire 100-year event. We designed an overflow for it, but the calculations there, the whole 100-year event is contained within that area for that watershed. The larger one, which is located underneath the building, that is the, that is 240 Cultec chambers. We designed an overflow for the 100-year event on that using the curbing of the roadway located right along the edge of the green shaded area in that location. In this particular drainage, I'm embarrassed to say that I made a small error in calculation, not in the size of it, but in the elevation of it. And one of the last things we revised in this particular design was to further decrease the retaining wall size and lowered the elevation from 114 to 112. And unfortunately, the inverts on that particular, on this utility sheet, never got changed to reveal, to basically come across on that particular change. So there's already a revision that I need to make on these plans. The drainage itself works exactly the same. It's just a matter of elevation of where it sits in the ground. I think that's all I have to say. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to answer them.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to traffic and transportation for an overview. So MDM,
Thank
Bob?
you. Thank you, D'Artagnan. For the record, Robert Michaud. I'm a managing principal at MDM Transportation Consultants. As Jesse had mentioned, our firm, MDM, has put together a comprehensive traffic impact and access study that will be subject to peer review under this process. The focal point of that study was not only the site itself, but some of the more significant intersections both north and south of the project, which are shown on this aerial diagram, to include the signalized intersections to the north at Brook Road and to the south at Bradley and Atherton Streets. Of course, the driveways for the site itself. D'Artagnan and Jesse did a nice job of explaining some of the other area public transportation systems that exist. There is a fairly close rail station, and of course we've got bus service directly along Route 138, which is a state jurisdiction roadway. It's subject to Mass DOT purview. The next slide, within the context of that stretch of Route 138, we know that the project itself is a relatively modest generator of traffic. Based on industry standard trip rates, we expect that an 118 unit residential apartment use would generate about 30 peak directional trips exiting the development in the morning over the course of a typical peak hour. And likewise, the converse in the evening, 32 entering vehicles over the course of an hour during those peak hours. Relative to the volumes that we know that exist on 138 Blue Hill Avenue, these represent a small percentage. We know that 138 carries approximately 13,000 vehicles a day and just under 1,000 vehicles per hour during these same hours that we're showing these relatively small changes. The next slide presents a snapshot in a stick figure format of how these trips are likely to be oriented to the study area intersections north and south of the project. You'll see that the orientation here is north-south orientation of Blue Hill Avenue with the Brook Road signal to the north, where we expect about 24 total vehicle trips to be generated over the course of an entire hour in the morning, typical peak hour morning, and likewise in the southerly direction at Atherton and Bradley Road signal about 16 vehicle trips per hour. Very modest numbers relative to that 1,000 vehicles per hour that I mentioned earlier. The next slide shows the PM peak hour equivalent to that with very similar results, about 30 vehicle trips per hour north, 21 south. That represents about one new vehicle trip being made every 2 to 3 minutes, right? It's, fairly inconsequential change in volume, and in fact, really falls within the day-to-day fluctuation that you would normally see in volumes along Blue Hill Avenue. Next slide. From a safety perspective, well, we'll get into this in more detail in the traffic component of the hearing process. We know that the study locations that we did look at all fall at or below the average crash experience in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Nothing is jumping out as being a significant high crash location that is otherwise in need of safety countermeasure. As we begin to focus on the site itself, we look at the sight lines that relate to the driveways, which again, we'll go into more detail in a later hearing process, but in fact exceed the minimum safety-based criteria for sight lines, or in other words, visibility for vehicles exiting the property to see oncoming vehicles and vice versa for approaching vehicles to see an exiting vehicle from the property. Finally, from a safety access and circulation perspective, we have taken the time to model Milton's largest potential responding vehicle, which is shown in this diagram to be the Milton Ladder 1 E1 Cyclone 2 vehicle. It's a relatively large ladder tower truck. and you'll see that the swept path of that vehicle easily fits within the confines of the proposed geometry and layout of the property. With that, I'll conclude, and we'll look forward to presenting more detail at an upcoming hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Board members, that concludes our presentation for tonight. I think we did keep it under an hour. So at this time, if the board wants to open it up to questions for the full team, we're happy to answer any questions or hear public comment, whatever the board's preference is. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schumer. The proposal will proceed as follows. We'll ask my board colleagues if they have any questions. I'll ask Ms. Barrett if she's got questions, and then I'll ask Mr. Hill if he's got questions, and then any members of the audience who wish to ask a question can do so. I'll be mindful of the fact that this was an introductory presentation, and as I indicated with the procedure, the Q&A portion of each of the presentations is not a substitute for the testimony itself, and people will, at a later point in the hearing, when all of the evidence is, when much more of the evidence has been presented, will have an opportunity to make presentations of their own. So let me ask members of the panel if they've got any questions. Ms. Joffer or Mr. O'Brien.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have several questions, but I'm going to reserve on them in anticipation that some of them will be answered in the coming days.
Great. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Giselle. Frank?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like my colleague, I have a number of questions. I'm mindful of the fact that this was a brief overview on the part of the applicant, and we'll get into the weeds on this as we move forward. Just very quickly on the traffic part of it, having sat through a number of hearings with traffic consultants and experts, count me skeptical. No disrespect to the consultant or to the profession, but this is a little bit of a black art. So I'll be particularly interested in the statistical basis for some of the conclusions and whatnot. Just fair warning. You're going to have to try to convince me a little bit here. As for some of the other comments, I noted that on the landscape architect's comment, there was a brief mention of 10 to 15 years for some of the plantings to take shape. I'd like a little bit more information about that. What are things going to look like from day one, if you will? Moving on to the civil engineering stuff. It gives me pause that there might have been a calculation. Calculation error. On the other hand, this is a human endeavor, so I just want to make sure that the numbers are the numbers. So we'll get into all of this, but appreciate overall a very good, very thorough presentation on the part of the applicant. With that, I'll conclude. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. O'Brien. Ms. Barrett?
There. I also have a number of questions, but I think I'd like to just be focused on two things this evening. One is, and not necessarily to be done tonight, but I think that the applicant should be prepared to explain to the board what alternatives were considered for the site plan to try to preserve all or as much of the existing historic gardens on the site as possible, given the weight of the concern that was expressed by the town during the project eligibility period. So it would be helpful to understand what the applicant did to address those concerns in now coming forward with what is essentially the same thing that was presented at the project eligibility stage. And the only other thing I'd like to point out, Mr. Chair, is that although the applicant's attorney is certainly correct that Mass Housing has made certain determinations about the appropriateness of the site and the design and so forth, that is not a permitting decision, and it certainly has no impact at all on the board's jurisdiction to determine under the statute what is an appropriate site and building design for the site. So I just want to make that clear for anybody who doesn't understand. What mass housing does is simply, it's a threshold decision, but it in no way ties the board's hands.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Open it up to I want to ask Mr. Hill, but before I do that, I have my own question. I too have several questions. With respect to the traffic, when we get to the traffic, my questions are going to surround expected mode share. I think it's unlikely to me that you're going to see anything other than vehicular traffic at the site. I know the 716 runs down 138, but I wouldn't really call that service. I mean, they're probably running no better than 1 hour headways, probably only 2 stops during the peak. And I don't think there's a bus stop within several blocks. So I don't think this is real service. Yes, I do see a bus. We do see a bus on 138, but it's not great service. And secondly, I don't know of any human being who would walk to the Fairmont station from this site, given the hill and the distance, frankly. I suppose it's possible. I saw on the diagram it was within a mile, but what that tells me is that this is really not it's not a multiple transportation mode site. I mean, perhaps we'll see some people walking to their neighbors, but I don't know that there's too many places to walk from the site. So we're going to dive a little bit. I would expect to dive further into that when we get to that. And certainly the neighbors know more about the site than I do, but those are questions that come to mind. And I would like to just ask the applicant to be prepared to answer those types of questions when we get to the traffic presentation. Let me I see that Amy and Michael McGrath have raised their hand. Let me recognize them. I don't know quite how to do that. Oh, perhaps I did.
I think Dan Hill should speak first. We just figured there was a big line, so we put our hand
I
up.
see. Okay.
So, but yeah, Dan and others who have been working with Dan should speak before we do.
Mr. Hill.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the opportunity to provide comment, and I think I'll keep my comments really brief right now. And we do have experts that we've hired on the issues of traffic, as well as civil engineering. We did file this morning a comment letter from our civil engineer, John Chesha, and I didn't see it posted yet on the town's website. So I just want to make sure that Bev received it. I emailed it to Bev and I copied Mr. Schomer on that. Did you get that, Bev?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I've been on mute.
Okay, great. And so we'll have comments at the appropriate time. In general, I echo the comments that have been made already by the board members. And we'll provide our substantive comments at the next meetings tomorrow on architecture and design, and then on civil engineering on Thursday night.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Ms. McGrath. I'm trying to manage the
Sorry.
because I'm managing the raising the hand, but I see 2 participants have raised their hand, but I don't know who they are.
Oh, here we go. Okay.
I'm sorry. I know that Ms. McGrath raised her hand, and we're happy to hear from her.
Well, this would be Mr. McGrath,
Oh, Mr. McGrath is fine.
There we go. Okay.
also known as Michael McGrath.
You share an account, according to my.
Yes, sort
Correct.
of.
Correct. I get Mr. Hill, you were, and Mr. Mull, you were right on my thoughts on the traffic, so I'll be very quick. I had forwarded a corridor, a Route 138 corridor study to the Rose Hill folks over the weekend. And it's a very great in-depth study. I'm assuming a lot of your board members have read it from 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But to hear the traffic engineer speak, I forget his name, And after I read through the report, you're 100% correct. It's like night and day. Since we're so close into this permitting process, I hope everybody understands on the other side that it is Route 138 and it's a state highway. It's not a bucolic Blue Hill Avenue. And it's a state highway at the end of the day. We all want to call it Blue Hill Ave, but it's a state highway. And Mr. Mullen, I would look forward to hopefully seeing you at the walkthrough over the weekend. I'd love to meet with you to talk about the intermittent stream that we talked about years ago, Mr. Burke, in regards to the intermittent stream and the wetlands we talked years ago about with Delphi Academy. I'd love to show you the intermittent stream and the runoff. So look forward to meeting you hopefully over the weekend. And thank you very much.
I'll be there. I look forward to meeting with you as well. Anybody else who wishes
Okay,
to be recognized?
two more. No, Jeff, you have your hand up. But I'm not. Speak.
I don't want to have my hand up. Oh, okay. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. Maybe could whomever is sharing their screen stop sharing the screen and we'll okay. Let me ask if there's any other members of the audience, members of the panel, town representatives, or members of the applicant or members of the applicant's team who have anything they'd like to share.
We have Kathleen O'Donnell.
Kathleen O'Donnell. Ms. O'Donnell.
Wait a minute. Okay. Kathleen?
Unmute. I believe I'm unmuted.
No.
You're good. Yep.
Okay. I just wanted to call attention to the fact that the planning board has made comments on this project, both to the select board with the eligibility letter and also with revised comments that Mr. Mullen had mentioned at the opening of the hearing. And we look forward to sitting in and putting input as the hearings progress.
Thank you very much, Ms. O'Donnell. For those of you who aren't aware, Ms. O'Donnell is a member of the Milton Planning Board, and a former member of the Milton Board of Appeals. So thank you for participating.
You're welcome.
Anybody else wish to be heard tonight? Okay, hearing none, let me call to close this session of the public hearing, and we will reconvene tomorrow evening at 7 o'clock to hear a presentation on architecture. Is that correct, Mr. Schumer?
That's correct, Mr. Chair.
And included in that will be landscape architecture.
Very good.
We look forward to it. Thank you very much. Good night, all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye now.